in the criminal world, money is rarely the most valuable currency. Power is, control is, and sometimes the price of mistake is not measured in dollars, but in human lives. Sophia Bennett had spent most of her life trying to escape the shadow of bad decisions that were never hers to begin with. At 23 years old, she believed she was finally close to building a future that belonged to her alone. New York City had always felt overwhelming, but also full of opportunity. Every morning, Sophia joined thousands of commuters moving through crowded subway stations and busy sidewalks, all chasing their own versions of success. For Sophia, success meant stability. She had grown up in a modest neighborhood in Queens, where financial stress was a constant presence in her family's life. Her mother passed away when she was still young, leaving Sophia and her father to navigate the world together. Her father, Daniel Bennett, had always been a complicated man. To outsiders, he appeared to be a hard-working businessman, someone who owned a small investment company that handled financial consulting for struggling entrepreneurs. But behind that professional image, Daniel Bennett carried a dangerous weakness: risk. He believed risk was the fastest path to wealth, and over time, that belief pushed him deeper into financial circles that ordinary people never encountered. Sophia did not fully understand those connections while growing up. She only noticed that her father's financial situation often fluctuated dramatically. Some months, their apartment felt comfortable. Other months, Daniel appeared stressed, distracted, and constantly speaking on the phone late into the night. Sophia responded the only way she knew how. She worked harder. School became her escape from uncertainty. She excelled academically, eventually earning a scholarship to study finance and accounting at one of the city's respected universities. Her goal was simple: build a life that did not depend on unpredictable risks. After graduating, Sophia secured a position as a junior accountant at a small financial auditing firm in Manhattan. The salary was modest, but the job represented something important: control over her own future. Each day, she analyzed financial records, reviewed tax statements, and helped businesses maintain transparency in their accounting systems. It was meticulous work, but Sophia enjoyed the clarity that came with numbers. Numbers rarely lied. Unfortunately, people often did. One evening, Sophia returned to the small apartment she still shared with her father. The atmosphere felt different the moment she stepped inside. Daniel sat at the kitchen table staring at a stack of documents spread across the surface. His usually confident posture had been replaced with something heavier: defeat. Sophia placed her bag down slowly. "What happened?" Daniel did not respond immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the papers. Finally, he spoke. "I made a mistake." Sophia felt a quiet tension settle in her chest. Her father had used that phrase before, and every time he did, it meant something serious. What kind of mistake? Daniel leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. An investment deal collapsed. Sophia frowned. That happens sometimes. Daniel shook his head slowly. This one was different. Sophia walked closer to the table. "What do you mean?" Daniel looked up at her. The fear in his eyes told her everything before he even spoke. The money wasn't entirely mine. The room felt suddenly smaller. Sophia understood what that meant. Her father had borrowed money, and based on his expression, he had borrowed it from the wrong people. "How much?" Daniel hesitated. "Several million." Sophia's breath caught. "That's impossible." Daniel lowered his gaze. "I thought I could double the investment before anyone noticed." Sophia closed her eyes briefly. This was exactly the type of risk she had spent years trying to escape. "Who did you borrow it from?" Daniel didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached for one of the documents on the table. The name printed at the top made Sophia's heart sink. Adrian Varela. Even people completely removed from the criminal world recognized that name. Adrian Varela was not simply a businessman. He was one of the most powerful figures operating in the shadows of international finance and organized crime. His empire extended across shipping companies, offshore accounts, and private investment networks that quietly controlled billions of dollars moving across global markets. But what made Adrian Varela truly feared was not just his wealth. It was his reputation. People who betrayed him rarely survived the consequences. Sophia felt the weight of that reality settle around her. How much do you owe him? Daniel swallowed. All of it. And you don't have it. No. The silence between them stretched painfully. Sophia's mind raced through possible solutions. Loans. Payment plans. Legal negotiations. But deep down, she knew none of those options would matter. Men like Adrian Varela did not operate under ordinary rules. A loud knock on the apartment door shattered the quiet. Both of them froze. Daniel's face turned pale. Sophia felt her heartbeat accelerate. Another knock followed, slower, more deliberate. Daniel stood slowly and walked toward the door. When he opened it, two men in dark suits stood in the hallway. Their posture was calm, but the authority in their presence was unmistakable. "Mr. Bennett," one of them said. "You're expected." Daniel nodded weakly. Sophia stepped closer. "Where are you going?" Daniel looked at her for a long moment. His expression carried something she had never seen before. Resignation. They want to discuss the debt. Sophia's voice tightened. "You're not going alone." Daniel didn't argue. Within 30 minutes, Sophia found herself sitting in the back of a black car moving through the streets of Manhattan. The destination was a private building near the financial district. The structure looked like a luxury office tower, but the security surrounding it suggested something far more serious. Inside, they were escorted to the top floor. The doors opened into a massive office overlooking the city skyline. And standing near the window was the man whose name had already reshaped Sophia's future. Adrian Varela. Tall, impeccably dressed, completely composed. He turned slowly as they entered. His eyes moved from Daniel to Sophia. Daniel spoke first. "I brought my daughter." Adrian studied Sophia carefully. His expression revealed nothing, but the silence in the room felt heavier with every passing second. Finally, Adrian spoke. "Mr. Bennett." Daniel lowered his head slightly. "I know I owe you money." Adrian nodded. "Yes." Daniel's voice trembled slightly. "I need more time." Adrian walked slowly toward the desk. "You already had time." Daniel's shoulders dropped. Sophia stepped forward. "There must be another way to resolve this." Adrian looked at her. For the first time, something resembling curiosity appeared in his eyes. "And who are you?" "Sophia Bennett." Adrian repeated the name quietly. "Sophia." Then he turned his attention back to Daniel. "You borrowed millions from my organization. You used those funds to gamble on investments that failed." Daniel said nothing. Adrian continued calmly. "That kind of mistake usually has consequences." Sophia felt the tension in the room tighten. Adrian walked back toward the window. The city stretched endlessly beneath him. Finally, he spoke again. "There is one way to resolve the debt." Daniel looked up quickly. Sophia's heart pounded. Adrian turned back toward them. His voice remained calm. "Your daughter will marry me." The words echoed through the office like a quiet explosion. Sophia felt the world shift beneath her feet. This was not negotiation. It was a decision, a punishment. Daniel closed his eyes. Sophia looked at Adrian, trying to understand how something so impossible had just become real. But what Adrian Varela did not know yet was that Sophia Bennett was already carrying a secret that could change everything. Power does not always reveal itself through violence. Sometimes it reveals itself through certainty, the quiet confidence of a man who knows that no one in the room has the ability to challenge him. Adrian Varela carried that certainty effortlessly. The moment he announced the terms of Daniel Bennett's debt, the atmosphere inside the office shifted in a way Sophia Bennett had never experienced before. The words themselves had been simple. "Sophia Bennett will marry me." But behind those words existed something far more serious than a personal decision. It was a demonstration of power. Adrian Varela did not negotiate with people who owed him millions of dollars. He decided their future. Sophia stood motionless in the center of the office while the city skyline stretched endlessly behind the massive windows. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Daniel Bennett looked as if the weight of the world had collapsed onto his shoulders. Sophia, however, felt something different, a strange mixture of disbelief and fear, not because Adrian had chosen marriage as the solution to the debt, but because she could already see the truth behind the decision. This was not about romance. It was about control. Adrian Varela had spent years building his reputation across the criminal world, and that reputation was not based on random cruelty. It was based on strategy. Sophia had heard the stories about him before that night. Stories whispered quietly in financial circles and business communities where people occasionally crossed paths with his companies. Some described him as a brilliant strategist who turned struggling shipping companies into powerful global logistics networks. Others spoke about the darker side of his empire. They talked about the way rival organizations disappeared after challenging his authority, about the way businessmen who tried to deceive him suddenly lost their companies, their reputations, or sometimes even their freedom. Adrian Varela believed in loyalty, and betrayal had consequences. Sophia looked at him carefully. The man standing across the room did not look like the violent criminal the rumors described. He looked composed, controlled. His movements were precise and calm, as if every action had already been calculated long before it happened, which made him far more dangerous. Because people like Adrian Varela did not act out anger. They acted out of strategy. Adrian walked slowly toward the large desk position in the center of the office. His attention returned briefly to Daniel Bennett. "You borrowed money from an organization built on trust," Adrian said calmly. Daniel nodded weakly. "I know. You promised repayment. I intended to repay it." Adrian's voice remained steady. "Intentions are meaningless when the numbers don't match." Daniel lowered his gaze. Sophia watched the exchange silently. Every word Adrian spoke reinforced the same truth. This marriage had nothing to do with her personally. She was simply the most effective way to punish her father. Adrian turned his attention toward her again. For the first time since entering the office, Sophia noticed a sharp intelligence in his eyes. He was observing her carefully, evaluating every detail. Her posture, her expression, her reaction to the situation. "You haven't said anything," Adrian noted. Sophia felt the tension tighten in her chest. "There isn't much to say." Adrian studied her response with interest. Most people confronted with a situation like this would react emotionally. Anger, desperation, panic. Sophia Bennett showed none of those things. Instead, she looked thoughtful, which meant she was processing the situation logically. "That's unusual," Adrian said quietly. Sophia held his gaze. "What is?" "Most people will be begging me to reconsider." Sophia answered calmly. "I doubt that would change your mind." For a moment, something resembling amusement flickered across Adrian's expression. "You're correct." The room fell quiet again. Sophia understood something important. Arguing would accomplish nothing. Adrian Varela had already decided the outcome. The only question now was how she would respond. Sophia took a slow breath. "If I refuse?" Adrian answered without hesitation. "Your father's debt will be collected in other ways." The meaning behind the statement was obvious. Daniel Bennett would not survive the consequences. Sophia glanced briefly toward her father. His defeated posture confirmed everything she already knew. He had gambled with money that belonged to a man who never lost. And now she was the price of that mistake. Adrian moved toward the window again, looking down at the city lights beginning to glow across Manhattan. His voice remained calm. "Marriage is a practical solution." Sophia frowned slightly. "Practical?" "Yes." Adrian turned slightly toward her. "You become part of my family. Your father's debt disappears, and the situation becomes resolved." Sophia recognized the strategic thinking behind his decision. A public marriage would also send a message to everyone watching Adrian's empire. Betrayal had consequences, but Adrian Varela also rewarded loyalty. Sophia Bennett would become a symbol, a reminder of the cost of financial deception. The realization made her stomach tighten. This marriage would not simply affect her life. It would affect how Adrian's entire organization viewed her. Sophia forced herself to remain calm. When would this happen? Adrian answered immediately. "Soon." Sophia nodded slowly. She had already reached the same conclusion he had. Refusing would destroy her father. Accepting would destroy the life she had planned. But at least accepting would keep her father alive. Adrian studied her expression again. "You're thinking carefully." Sophia looked at him. "Yes." "Most people in your position wouldn't." Sophia responded quietly. I've spent my entire life fixing problems other people created. The honesty in her voice caught Adrian's attention. He stepped closer. Then you understand something important. What? Responsibility. Sophia did not answer, but the word lingered in her mind. Responsibility. That was exactly why she could not reveal the secret she had been hiding since the moment she entered the building. The secret growing quietly inside her, because the truth would change everything, and possibly put her life in serious danger. Adrian finally stepped away from the window. Preparations will begin immediately. Daniel looked up slowly. Thank you. Adrian's expression remained cold. This is not kindness. Daniel nodded. I understand. Sophia remained silent. Her mind was racing through the implications of what had just happened. She was about to marry one of the most feared men in the world, a man who had built his empire by crushing anyone who betrayed him, and he had no idea that the woman he intended to marry was already hiding something from him. Adrian turned toward the door, then paused. His eyes moved back toward Sophia. For several seconds, he simply watched her, carefully, thoughtfully. The silence stretched long enough for Sophia to feel the weight of his attention. Finally, Adrian spoke again. You're hiding something. Sophia felt her heartbeat stop for a brief moment. The suspicion in his voice was calm, but unmistakable. And for the first time since entering the office, Sophia realized the most dangerous man in the room might already be closer to discovering her secret than she ever expected. Weddings are usually built around joy. Families gather. Friends celebrate. Two people promise to build a future together. But sometimes a wedding becomes something very different. Sometimes it becomes a contract, a public declaration of power, a reminder that in certain worlds, marriage has nothing to do with love. For Sophia Bennett, the day she became Adrian Varela's wife felt less like a celebration and more like the signing of a sentence she had never agreed to. The ceremony took place 3 weeks after the meeting in Adrian's office. 3 weeks that passed in a strange blur of preparation and quiet tension. Sophia had not been given much time to think. Adrian's organization handled every detail with cold efficiency. Legal documents were arranged. Security protocols were finalized. Invitations were sent to individuals who held power inside the same shadowed world Adrian controlled. The message behind the wedding was clear. Adrian Varela was announcing something to the entire criminal network. Daniel Bennett's betrayal had been punished, and the resolution had become permanent. On the morning of the ceremony, Sophia stood alone in a private dressing room inside a luxury hotel overlooking Manhattan. The city skyline stretched beyond the tall windows, glowing under the pale light of early afternoon. A white wedding dress rested against her shoulders. The fabric was elegant, expensive, perfectly tailored. Yet Sophia felt nothing when she looked at herself in the mirror. No excitement, no happiness, only a quiet awareness that her life had crossed into a place she could never fully escape. Her hands rested gently against her stomach. The subtle movement had become instinctive, a silent reminder of the secret she carried. The pregnancy was still early enough to remain hidden, but the fear of discovery had followed her every moment during the past weeks. Adrian Varela was not a man who tolerated deception. If he discovered that she had hidden something so significant from him before the marriage, Sophia did not want to imagine the consequences. A quiet knock interrupted her thoughts. One of the hotel staff entered briefly to inform her that the guests had begun arriving. Sophia nodded. Her heart beat steadily, though her mind felt strangely calm. Sometimes when life reaches its most difficult moment, fear disappears. Not because the danger is gone, but because acceptance takes its place. The ceremony was held inside a private ballroom, reserved exclusively for Adrian's guests. As Sophia stepped into the hallway leading toward the entrance, the scale of the event became clear. Security guards stood positioned at every corner. Men in dark suits moved quietly through the building, communicating through small earpieces. Every precaution had been arranged to protect the most powerful figures attending the wedding, because the guest list did not include ordinary people. Several of the most influential individuals operating within the international criminal world had arrived: shipping magnates, financial brokers, political intermediaries who quietly connected legitimate institutions to underground networks. Some of them had traveled from other countries to witness the event, not because they cared about the marriage itself, but because Adrian Varela rarely made decisions without purpose. And this wedding was clearly meant to send a message. Inside the ballroom, the atmosphere felt controlled rather than festive. The decorations were elegant. Soft music drifted through the air. But the conversations among the guests carried a quiet seriousness. Many of them understood exactly what the ceremony represented: a punishment, a strategic alliance, a demonstration of Adrian's power. Sophia noticed the way people observed her as she entered the room, not with warmth, not with curiosity, but with calculation. To them, she was not simply a bride. She was a symbol, the daughter of a man who betrayed Adrian Varela, and now the permanent reminder of that betrayal. At the front of the ballroom, Adrian stood near the ceremony platform. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit. His posture remained calm and composed, exactly as Sophia remembered from the night they first met. There was no sign of emotion in his expression, no visible excitement, no hesitation. To Adrian Varela, this wedding was not a romantic milestone. It was a strategic decision. Sophia walked slowly down the aisle. Each step felt strangely distant. The faces watching her blurred together as she approached the front of the room. When she finally reached Adrian's side, he glanced briefly toward her. His gaze was steady, observant, but completely unreadable. The ceremony itself passed quickly. Legal documents were signed. Formal vows were spoken. Photographs were taken to document the moment for those who required proof that the marriage had occurred. Throughout the entire process, Adrian remained emotionally distant. He spoke only when necessary, answered questions calmly, maintained the same composed presence that had made his reputation so intimidating across the criminal world. Sophia understood why. This marriage was not personal for him. It was a message, and messages did not require affection. Yet beneath the calm exterior, Sophia could feel the weight of the moment pressing against her thoughts. She had become Adrian Varela's wife. The realization felt surreal. The quiet applause from the guests marked the end of the ceremony. Small conversations resumed throughout the room. Several individuals approached Adrian to offer formal congratulations. Others simply observed from a distance. Sophia remained standing beside him, aware of how every pair of eyes occasionally returned to her. She could hear fragments of whispers drifting through the crowd. The daughter of the man who owed millions. Adrian's punishment. A reminder of loyalty. Each phrase reinforced the same truth. She did not belong to this world. Yet now she was permanently connected to it. After the guests began leaving, the ballroom slowly emptied. Only a small group of Adrian's closest advisors remained behind. Victor Calderon approached briefly to confirm that the transportation arrangements were ready. Sophia watched quietly as Adrian listened to the updates. Even on the day of his wedding, his focus remained fixed on organization and control. Finally, Adrian turned toward her. For a moment, the noise of the room faded again. Sophia met his gaze. There was no anger there, no warmth either, just calm authority. Adrian spoke in a steady voice. "The car is waiting." Sophia nodded slightly. She already knew what he meant. This ceremony had never been the final destination. It was simply the beginning. Adrian continued, "You'll be staying at my residence." Sophia felt a small tightening in her chest. She had heard rumors about the mansion, a massive estate outside the city that served not only as Adrian's home, but as the operational center of his empire, a place protected by layers of security, a place where every movement was monitored. Adrian stepped toward the exit of the ballroom. His final words carried quiet certainty. "From now on, that is where you live." And with that, Sophia Bennett left the ballroom as Adrian Varela's wife, knowing she was about to enter the most dangerous world she had ever imagined. Powerful empires rarely announce themselves to the world. They hide behind quiet buildings, control conversations, and decisions made far away from public attention. Adrian Varela's mansion was exactly that kind of place. The drive from Manhattan to the estate took nearly an hour. As the black car carrying Sophia Bennett left the crowded streets of the city behind, the skyline slowly disappeared into the distance. Tall buildings gave way to quieter roads and thick forests surrounding private properties owned by the wealthiest individuals in the region. Sophia sat silently in the back seat, her hands resting in her lap as she watched the landscape pass through the window. Across from her, Adrian remained focused on several documents resting on a tablet. The silence between them felt natural. There had never been the expectation of conversation. Their marriage had already been defined as something practical rather than personal. When the car finally slowed, large iron gates appeared at the end of a long private road. Security guards stepped forward immediately. The moment they recognized Adrian's vehicle, the gates opened without hesitation. Sophia watched as the car entered the state grounds. The property stretched far beyond what she expected. Wide fields and carefully maintained gardens surrounded the main structure. Multiple security cameras lined the road. Patrol vehicles moved slowly across the perimeter. It was clear that this estate had been designed for more than luxury. It had been designed for protection. The mansion itself stood at the center of the property. Tall stone walls rose several stories high, with large glass windows reflecting the fading light of the evening sky. Sophia had seen impressive homes before, but this building felt different. It looked less like a residence and more like the headquarters of something powerful. When the car stopped near the main entrance, several members of the staff were already waiting. They greeted Adrian with quiet professionalism. Every movement suggested absolute discipline. Sophia stepped out of the car and followed Adrian to the large front doors. Inside, the mansion revealed its true scale. A massive central hall stretched upward toward a high glass ceiling. Elegant chandeliers hung above polished marble floors. Large paintings decorated the walls, each one carefully positioned to emphasize the grandeur of the space. But despite the beauty, the atmosphere carried something else: control. Sophia noticed it immediately. People moved through the halls with clear purpose. Staff members spoke in calm, quiet voices. Security personnel remained positioned at key points throughout the building. Every detail suggested that the mansion operated under a strict structure. Victor Calderon approached as they entered the hall. "Everything is ready." Adrian nodded slightly. Then he turned toward Sophia. "Victor will show you your room." Sophia followed Victor through a series of corridors that seemed to extend endlessly throughout the building. The deeper they walked into the mansion, the more she realized that this place functioned as far more than a home. Several offices were filled with employees reviewing financial reports. Large conference rooms displayed digital maps showing shipping routes across international waters. Security teams monitored multiple surveillance screens. The mansion was the central command point for Adrian Varela's entire empire. Victor opened a door at the end of a quiet hallway. "This will be your room." Sophia stepped inside. The space looked more like a private suite than a bedroom. Large windows overlooked the gardens. A spacious desk stood near the wall. Several shelves were already stocked with books and documents. Victor watched her expression carefully. "You'll have privacy here." Sophia nodded slowly. "Thank you." Victor paused briefly before speaking again. Life inside this house follows certain routines. Sophia looked toward him. "What kind of routines?" Victor's voice remained calm. "Security protocols, restricted areas, and scheduled meetings that happen regularly." Sophia understood the meaning behind his explanation. This mansion functioned like a controlled system. Every person inside it had a role, and every movement was part of a larger structure. The following days revealed just how complex that structure truly was. Sophia quickly realized that Adrian rarely stayed idle. Every morning began with meetings involving financial analysts, shipping coordinators, and international business representatives. The empire he controlled extended across multiple industries. Shipping companies moved cargo between continents. Investment firms managed massive financial portfolios. And private security contractors protected assets that most people would never even know existed. Sophia spent much of her time observing. At first, she believed her role inside the mansion would remain minimal, but gradually she found herself drawn into the rhythm of the household. She learned the names of the staff members, the schedules of the security teams, the way information moved through Adrian's organization, and slowly, she began noticing something unusual. Tension. It appeared in small details. Short conversations between advisors that ended abruptly when someone approached. documents being quietly moved between offices late at night, private meetings happening more frequently than expected. Sophia had spent years studying financial systems. She understood how large organizations behaved. And something about Adrian's operation suggested that a problem was quietly developing beneath the surface. One evening, while walking to the hallway near the operations wing, Sophia noticed voices coming from one of the conference rooms. The door was slightly open. She had no intention of listening. But a single phrase caught her attention. The shipments have already been redirected. Sophia paused. Another voice responded. If Adrian finds out too soon, the entire plan collapses. The words made her heartbeat quicken. The conversation continued quietly inside the room. The transfers are still moving through the Baltimore accounts. That's risky. We don't have much time. Sophia remained perfectly still in the hallway. Every instinct told her that she had just stumbled onto something she was never meant to hear. The final voice inside the room spoke with cold certainty. Once the money finishes moving, Varela won't be able to stop what's coming. Sophia's breath caught in her chest, because the voices inside the conference room were discussing something impossible, a betrayal. And now Sophia Bennett knew that someone inside Adrian Varela's empire was secretly working against him. The most dangerous secrets are rarely hidden behind locked doors. They hide in plain sight, buried inside numbers, documents, and small details most people never notice. Sophia Bennett had spent years studying financial systems. It was the reason she had chosen accounting as a career. Numbers followed patterns, and patterns often revealed truths that words try to hide. Standing outside the conference room that evening, listening to the quiet conversation inside, Sophia felt that familiar instinct returning. Something inside Adrian Varela's empire was wrong, and whoever had been speaking behind that door clearly believed Adrian had not discovered it yet. Sophia forced herself to walk away from the hallway before anyone inside the room noticed her presence. Her steps remained calm, but her thoughts moved quickly. If there truly was conspiracy forming inside Adrian's organization, it would almost certainly involve financial manipulation. Money was the lifeblood of any empire. Control the money, and eventually you control everything else. Sophia returned to the private office space Victor Calderon had assigned to her for administrative work. The room was quiet, illuminated only by the soft glow of the desk lamp. For several minutes, she simply stood there thinking. The safest choice would have been to forget what she had heard, to continue living quietly inside the mansion and avoid involving herself in matters that could easily become deadly. But the problem with that option was simple. Sophia was now married to Adrian Varela. Whether she liked it or not, his world had become her world. And if someone inside his organization was planning betrayal, the consequences would eventually affect her as well. Sophia sat down at the desk and turned on the computer terminal connected to the mansion's internal financial system. Her access privileges allowed her to review logistics reports, shipping transactions, and general accounting records. Not the highest level of information, but more than enough to begin searching for patterns. She started with the details she had overheard, the Baltimore accounts. Sophia opened the shipping division, records connected to that port. At first glance, the numbers looked normal. Regular cargo transfers, routine financial movements between companies. But the longer she studied the data, the more something felt unusual. The transfers were smaller than expected, frequent, and carefully distributed across multiple accounts. Sophia leaned closer to the screen. Someone had been redirecting funds in very precise increments, too small to attract immediate attention, but large enough to accumulate significant value over time. She opened another document and began calculating the totals manually. The numbers added up quickly. Over the past 6 months, millions of dollars had quietly moved out of Adrian's primary shipping accounts. Sophia felt her heartbeat quicken. This was not a minor accounting error. This was deliberate. Someone inside Adrian's organization was secretly draining money from his empire. But the most troubling detail came when Sophia traced where the funds had gone. The destination accounts belonged to a logistics company operating on the eastern shipping routes. A company that, according to Adrian's internal records, had once belonged to a rival organization. Sophia searched the company name again. The file confirmed her suspicion. The company was connected to a man named Victor Salazar, a name Sophia had never heard before, but one that appeared frequently in the intelligence reports she had briefly seen in Adrian's meetings. Victor Salazar controlled a smaller criminal network that had attempted to challenge Adrian's operations years earlier. Adrian's organization had forced him out of several major ports. Most people believe Salazar's empire had collapsed after that defeat, but the financial records now told a different story. Salazar had been rebuilding, and someone inside Adrian's own empire had been helping him. Sophia sat back in her chair. The scale of the conspiracy suddenly became clear. If Salazar regained financial strength, he could rebuild the network Adrian had destroyed. And if that happened, a war between their organizations would be inevitable. Sophia closed her eyes briefly. This was far bigger than anything she had expected, and she was now holding the evidence. Over the next several days, Sophia continued reviewing the financial records quietly. She moved carefully, making sure no one noticed the unusual attention she was giving to certain accounts. Every new file confirmed the same disturbing truth. Money was being redirected with extraordinary precision. Only someone with significant authority inside the organization could approve transactions like these, which meant the trader was not a low-level employee. It was someone close to Adrian's inner circle. One evening, Sophia remained in operations office long after most of the staff had left. She was reviewing a set of shipping reports when the door opened behind her. Adrian Varela stepped inside. Sophia immediately stood. I didn't realize anyone else was still working. Adrian glanced at the documents on her desk. You're studying the logistics reports. Sophia nodded. Yes. Adrian moved closer to the desk. His presence carried the same calm authority she had noticed from the beginning. What are you looking for? Sophia hesitated briefly. She had not yet decided whether to reveal her discovery, but Adrian's eyes remained fixed on the documents. He already suspected something. Sophia turned the computer screen slightly toward him. These transfers look unusual. Adrian studied the data. His expression remained neutral, but his attention sharpened immediately. What makes you say that? The transaction patterns. Sophia pointed to several lines on the report. The amounts are small, but the timing is consistent. Adrian leaned slightly closer. She continued. Someone is moving money through secondary accounts. For months. Adrian's eyes moved across the screen again. Slowly, carefully. Then he spoke quietly. You noticed this on your own. Sophia nodded. Adrian studied her for a moment longer. Most of my financial analysts haven't raised this issue. Sophia did not know how to answer that. She had simply followed the numbers. But the realization that Adrian's professional analyst had missed something she discovered made the moment feel heavier. Adrian finally stepped back from the desk. You're observant. Sophia looked at him carefully. I've spent a long time working with financial data. Adrian nodded slightly. And you noticed something everyone else overlooked. The compliment felt strange coming from a man with his reputation. Sophia looked back at the documents. There's more. Adrian waited. These transfers connect to a company controlled by Victor Salazar. For the first time since entering the room, Adrian's expression changed slightly. Not anger, but focus. Victor Salazar was not a small problem. If Salazar was rebuilding his network using Adrian's own financial resources, the consequences could be catastrophic. Adrian closed the laptop slowly. You've just uncovered something extremely serious. Sophia understood that already. What happens now? Adrian's voice remained calm. Now we find out who inside my organization is responsible. Sophia nodded. But as Adrian turned to leave the room, she noticed something unsettling. One of Adrian's senior advisors had been standing quietly in the hallway outside the office, watching, and the expression in the man's eyes suggested he had been observing Sophia far longer than she realized. Because the moment their eyes met, Sophia understood something dangerous. Someone inside Adrian Varela's empire had just begun suspecting that she was hiding a secret. Empires rarely collapse in a single moment. They fracture slowly, through quiet betrayals, hidden financial movements, and enemies waiting patiently for the right moment to strike. But once the first attack begins, everything changes. Within 2 weeks of Sophia Bennett revealing the suspicious financial transfers, Adrian Varela's empire began feeling the consequences of betrayal that had been building quietly for months. The first sign appeared in one of Adrian's largest shipping operations along the eastern seaboard. A cargo shipment scheduled to leave Baltimore suddenly disappeared from the system. The vessel had departed on schedule, but the cargo itself had been redirected before reaching its destination. The loss was not random. The shipment contained rare industrial materials valued at several $1,000,000. Adrian's logistics teams initially believed it was a technical mistake, but Sophia already understood what it meant. Victor Salazar had started moving. Sophia stood inside the operations room of the mansion, while several members of Adrian's leadership team gathered around a digital map displaying shipping routes across the Atlantic. The atmosphere inside the room felt tense. Reports arrived continuously. Several warehouses connected to Adrian's network had been inspected by unexpected federal regulators. A private transport convoy in New Jersey had been intercepted by unknown armed groups, and 2 financial accounts used to manage offshore investments had suddenly been frozen without explanation. None of these incidents were isolated. They were coordinated. Adrian watched the incoming reports with the calm focus of someone who had already anticipated the possibility of war. "This is Salazar," Victor Calderon said quietly. Adrian nodded once. "Yes." Sophia studied the digital map carefully. Red markers began appearing across multiple locations. Baltimore, New Jersey, Miami. Each one represented a disruption in Adrian's operations. Sophia spoke carefully. "The financial transfers we discovered gave Salazar access to internal shipping schedules." Adrian looked toward her. "You're suggesting the information leak was more extensive?" Sophia nodded. "If someone inside the organization redirected money for months, they likely shared operational data as well." Victor Calderon crossed his arms. "That means Salazar knows exactly where to strike." Adrian remained silent for several seconds. Then he gave a simple instruction: shut down the Baltimore port operations immediately. Several staff members began issuing orders across communication channels. Sophia watched the process carefully. This was the first time she had seen Adrian respond to a direct threat against his empire, and what she noticed most was not anger. It was precision. Every decision he made seemed calculated. Instead of reacting emotionally, he began reorganizing his operations like a strategist repositioning pieces on a chessboard. Over the following days, the conflict escalated quickly. Salazar's organization launched additional attacks against Adrian's financial infrastructure. Shipping containers disappeared before reaching their destinations. Insurance claims connected to Adrian's businesses were suddenly denied. Several international partners abruptly canceled long-standing agreements. Each move targeted a different part of Adrian's empire. The objective was clear: destabilize the network, force Adrian's organization into chaos. But Adrian responded just as aggressively. Several smaller shipping companies connected to Salazar suddenly lost access to major trade ports. 2 of Salazar's financial intermediaries were quietly arrested for tax violations, and a private cargo vessel belonging to Salazar's network disappeared while crossing the Caribbean shipping lanes. The war between the 2 empires had begun. Inside the mansion, the atmosphere grew more intense with each passing day. Meetings occurred almost constantly. Financial analysts reviewed transaction patterns. Security teams monitored communication channels for signs of additional betrayal. Sophia found herself sitting in the operations room almost every night. Her ability to analyze financial patterns had suddenly become valuable. Adrian had begun asking for her input during several strategic discussions. At first, his advisors seemed uncomfortable with her presence. Many of them still viewed her as an outsider, the daughter of a man who had nearly destroyed Adrian's organization through financial recklessness. But the numbers did not lie. Sophia's observations repeatedly helped identify weaknesses in Salazar's financial structure. One evening, while reviewing shipping data from Miami, Sophia noticed something unusual. "These routes are being manipulated." Adrian looked toward the screen. "What do you mean?" Sophia highlighted several lines of data. "Salazar's cargo ships are changing their routes every 3 days. Victor Calderon frowned. "That's normal during a conflict." Sophia shook her head. "Not like this." She zoomed in on the map. They're avoiding specific ports. Adrian stepped closer. Which ones? Sophia pointed at the highlighted locations. The ones controlled by your strongest allies. The realization spread quickly across the room. Salazar was isolating Adrian's supply network, slowly cutting him off from the partnerships that made his empire stable. Adrian studied the map carefully. Then he looked at Sophia. You noticed this immediately. Sophia nodded. It's a financial pattern disguised as a shipping strategy. For the first time during the conflict, Adrian allowed a small expression of approval. Good work. The recognition surprised several members of the team. But Adrian did not seem concerned with their reactions. What mattered to him was efficiency. And Sophia had proven that she could identify threats quickly. As the days passed, Adrian began relying on her insight more frequently. Sophia noticed a change. During meetings, Adrian occasionally asked her opinion before consulting his senior advisors. The shift created quiet tension among some members of the organization, but none of them openly challenged Adrian's decisions. Because Adrian Varela rarely made mistakes when choosing the people he trusted, despite the growing sense of responsibility Sophia felt. Another concern remained constantly in the back of her mind. Her pregnancy. The secret had been manageable during the early weeks. Loose clothing, careful scheduling, limited physical activity. But as time passed, the physical changes became harder to hide. Her energy fluctuated. Certain foods suddenly made her ill. And one afternoon, while reviewing financial reports inside the operations room, Sophia felt a wave of dizziness strong enough to force her to sit down quickly. Adrian noticed immediately. You should rest. Sophia nodded slightly. I'm fine. But the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. The stress of the conflict was beginning to affect her body, and the more time she spent working alongside Adrian, the greater the risk that someone would notice. That evening, Sophia returned to her room earlier than usual. The mansion felt quiet for once. Most of Adrian's leadership team had left to coordinate operations across different cities. Sophia sat on the edge of her bed, pressing her hands gently against her stomach. The life growing inside her felt suddenly more real than ever. She had spent months hiding the truth, but the war surrounding Adrian's empire was accelerating, and secrets had a way of revealing themselves when pressure increased. Sophia stood slowly and walked toward the large window overlooking the dark gardens of the estate. She knew something with absolute certainty. Sooner or later, Adrian Varela would discover the truth, and when he did, everything would change. Because the secret Sophia Bennett had been hiding from the most powerful man in the room was about to become impossible to conceal. Secrets have a strange way of surviving in silence. They hide behind calm expressions, careful routines, and moments where the truth feels too dangerous to reveal. But no matter how carefully someone protects a secret, there eventually comes a moment when it refuses to remain hidden. For Sophia Bennett, that moment arrived on a quiet afternoon inside Adrian Varela's mansion. The war with Victor Salazar's organization had reached its most dangerous stage. Over the previous weeks, both empires had suffered heavy financial and logistical losses. Adrian's advisors moved constantly between cities, coordinating operations and strengthening alliances. Inside the mansion, strategy meetings became longer and more intense. Sophia had become a regular presence in those meetings. Her understanding of financial patterns continued to reveal weaknesses inside Salazar's network, and Adrian had begun relying on her observations more than anyone expected. But the pressure of the war had also pushed Sophia's body to its limits. The pregnancy she had hidden for months was no longer easy to disguise. That afternoon, the operations room was filled with activity. Large screens displayed shipping routes and financial transfers, while Adrian and several advisors studied a new set of intelligence reports. Sophia stood near the central table, reviewing a document connected to offshore banking accounts. The numbers blurred slightly in front of her. She blinked, trying to regain focus, but the dizziness returned suddenly, stronger than before. For a moment, the room tilted around her. Sophia reached for the edge of the table, but her grip slipped. The document she had been holding fell to the floor, and before she could steady herself, her body collapsed with it. The sudden sound echoed through the room. Several advisors turned immediately. Victor Calderon stepped forward first. Sophia, But Adrian had already moved. He reached her side before anyone else could react. Sophia's vision felt distant as she tried to sit up. "I'm fine," she murmured weakly. But Adrian was already studying her expression carefully. His instincts told him something was wrong. "Sophia," he said calmly, "look at me." She lifted her eyes toward him. The concern in his gaze was subtle, but unmistakable. "I just need a moment," she said quietly. Adrian did not respond. Instead, he signaled to one of the security staff standing near the door. "Call the doctor." Sophia's heart tightened. "That isn't necessary." Adrian's voice remained firm. "Yes, it is." Within minutes, the mansion's private physician arrived. The older man carried a small medical case and immediately began checking Sophia's pulse and blood pressure. The advisors slowly left the room, giving them space. Sophia sat quietly while the doctor worked. Adrian remained standing nearby, watching the examination closely. The silence in the room grew heavier with each passing second. Finally, the doctor looked up from his notes. His expression carried the kind of calm seriousness that made Sophia's stomach tighten. "Mr. Varela," the doctor said carefully. "Yes, there's nothing seriously wrong." Sophia released a quiet breath of relief, but the doctor continued. "However, there is something you should know." Adrian waited. The doctor glanced briefly toward Sophia. Then he spoke. "Mrs. Varela is pregnant." The words hung in the air like a quiet explosion. For several seconds, no one moved. Sophia felt her entire body freeze. The moment she had feared for months had arrived, and there was no hiding from it now. Adrian stood completely still. His expression did not change immediately, but his eyes moved slowly toward Sophia. Pregnant. The word echoed silently in his mind. He dismissed the doctor with a brief nod, leaving only the two of them in the room. The door closed quietly behind the physician. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything Sophia had experienced before. Adrian spoke first. "How long?" Sophia swallowed. Her voice felt small. "Several months." Adrian's eyes narrowed slightly. "That means it began before the wedding." Sophia nodded. "Yes." Another silence followed, but this time it carried tension. Adrian turned away briefly, walking toward a large window overlooking the estate. For a man who controlled one of the most powerful criminal empires in the country, surprises were rare. And yet this revelation had just changed everything. Sophia watched him carefully. She had expected anger, perhaps even accusations. But Adrian's reaction was more complicated than she anticipated. His mind was already analyzing the implications. Finally, he turned back toward her. "There's only one possible explanation." Sophia met his gaze. "Yes." Adrian's voice remained calm, but it carried new weight. "The child is mine." Sophia felt her heartbeat accelerate. "Yes." Adrian studied her face for several seconds. He was not searching for lies. He was evaluating the truth behind her silence all these months. "You knew before the wedding?" Sophia nodded slowly. "I found out shortly after my father's death became known." Adrian considered that. "And you chose not to tell me." Sophia's voice trembled slightly. "I didn't know how you would react." The honesty in her answer surprised him. Adrian walked slowly back toward the center of the room. "You believed I would see it as deception." Sophia looked down briefly. "I believed you might see it as betrayal." Adrian stopped in front of her. For the first time since they met, his expression softened slightly, not with warmth, but with understanding. Because in his world, betrayal was the worst crime someone could commit. Yet Sophia's silence had not come from betrayal. It had come from fear. Adrian finally spoke again. "You should have told me." Sophia nodded. "I know." He studied her quietly. Then he looked down briefly toward her stomach. The reality settled in slowly. The woman he had married as punishment for her father's debt was now carrying his child, which meant Sophia Bennett was no longer simply part of a financial agreement. She had become something far more important. Adrian turned toward the door. "There will be changes." Sophia looked up. "What kind of changes?" Adrian's voice carried quiet authority. "You will no longer attend operational meetings." Sophia frowned slightly. "But the financial analysis." "I will handle the war." His tone left no room for argument. Sophia understood the meaning behind his decision. He was protecting her and protecting the child. For the first time since their marriage began, Sophia saw Adrian Varela differently, not simply as a ruthless leader everyone feared, but as a man who suddenly carried responsibility he had never planned to accept. Adrian moved toward the door. The war with Salazar's empire had already reached its most dangerous stage, and now the stakes were even higher, because Adrian Varela was no longer fighting only for power. He was fighting for the future of the family he never expected to have. He paused briefly before leaving the room. "There's something you should understand." Sophia looked toward him. Adrian's voice carried the quiet certainty of a man preparing for battle. "The people responsible for this war are about to learn the cost of threatening what belongs to me." And with that, Adrian Varela began preparing for the final confrontation that would decide the fate of his empire. 8. The woman who changed the Mafia boss word count. 2000 to 2100 hook. Transformation. The woman forced into marriage becomes a person who changes Adrian Varela forever. Content points. Final confrontation with the rival organization. Adrian securing full control of his empire. Sophia giving birth to their child. Adrian protecting both mother and child from the criminal world. Sophia deciding whether to remain in Adrian's world or walk away. Emotional layer. Sophia realizes a punishment that once destroyed her life ultimately reshaped it. Cliffhanger ending months later. Sophia looks back on the moment her father promised her to Adrian Varela. What once felt like the end of her freedom was actually the moment that changed both of their destinies forever. Write a section named insert section name in a specific tone aligned with the overall theme. Use third-person narration. Ensure smooth transitions from the previous section. Strictly follow the assigned word count. Add one strong emotional or intellectual hook inside the section. Avoid repeating earlier scenes. End with a clear cliffhanger sentence that leads into the next section. Keep it under 2,100 words. Powerful men rarely change. They build their lives on control, discipline, and decisions that allow no room for hesitation. Once a person reaches the top of a criminal empire, transformation becomes almost impossible. The world around them reinforces the same rule every day. Weakness is punished, and emotion is dangerous. For most of his life, Adrian Varela believed that rule completely, until Sophia Bennett entered his world. The revelation of Sophia's pregnancy changed the structure of Adrian's thinking in ways he had not expected. The war with Victor Salazar had already pushed his empire toward its most volatile moment, but the stakes were now far more personal. Salazar was no longer simply challenging Adrian's authority. He was threatening Adrian's future. Within days of learning the truth about the child, Adrian began preparing the final phase of the conflict. The intelligence reports gathered over the past weeks revealed that Salazar had concentrated most of his remaining operations in two major locations, an offshore financial network operating through Panama and a private shipping hub near the southern coast of Florida. The plan was simple in theory but dangerous in execution. If Adrian destroyed both centers of operation simultaneously, Salazar's organization would collapse overnight. But achieving that result required precise coordination. Inside the mansion, the operations room became the center of constant activity. Advisors moved between digital maps, financial reports, and communication systems linking multiple cities. Sophia remained mostly in her private suite, following Adrian's instructions to avoid the daily meetings. At first, the distance felt strange. For weeks she had been involved directly in analyzing conspiracy threatening Adrian's empire. Now she could only observe the developments from a distance. But the reason behind Adrian's decision was obvious: protection. Every member of the organization had been informed that Sophia's safety was now a priority. Security around the mansion doubled. Additional guards monitored the surrounding property. No one entered the estate without multiple layers of verification. Adrian's actions were clear. The war would end soon, and he intended to ensure that neither Sophia nor the child would ever become a target. Late one evening, Adrian entered Sophia's room quietly. She was sitting near the window, reading one of the financial reports she had grown accustomed to reviewing. The moment he stepped inside, she noticed something different in his expression, a quiet finality. "The preparations are complete," Adrian said. Sophia set the report aside. You're leaving tonight. It was not a question. Adrian nodded once. Sophia studied him carefully. Despite the calm tone in his voice, she could see the weight of responsibility in his posture. A decision of the scale always carried consequences. You believe this will end it, she said. Adrian moved closer to the window. Yes. Sophia hesitated briefly before speaking again. Victor Salazar won't surrender easily. Adrian looked at her. No. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Sophia asked a question that had been quietly forming in her mind for weeks. What happens after the war? Adrian considered the question carefully. For my organization? For everything, Sophia said. Adrian did not answer immediately. Instead, he studied her expression. Something about the question carried a deeper meaning, because Sophia Bennett had never asked about power before, only about survival. I intend to end it completely, Adrian finally said. Sophia nodded slowly. She understood what that meant. Once Salazar's empire collapsed, Adrian would have complete control over the criminal network that had once challenged him. It would make him even more powerful than before. But power always carried a cost. Sophia wondered whether Adrian was beginning to see that cost differently now. The following 48 hours determined the future of Adrian's empire. While Sophia remained inside the heavily secured mansion, Adrian traveled between several cities coordinating the final operation. His teams moved quickly. Financial accounts connected to Salazar's network were frozen simultaneously across multiple international banks. Several of Salazar's remaining shipping vessels were intercepted before leaving port, and the final strike occurred at the Florida logistics hub. Without financial support or operational infrastructure, Salazar's organization collapsed within a single night. By the time Adrian returned to Mansion, the war was already over. Victor Salazar had disappeared from the criminal network entirely. Some reports suggested he had fled the country. Others believed he had been quietly removed by individuals who preferred not to be connected to a losing side. Either way, the result was the same. Adrian Varela now controlled the most powerful criminal empire in the region without any serious opposition. The victory brought stability back to the mansion. Meetings became less frequent. Security operations slowly returned to their normal routines. And for the first time since Sophia arrived at this estate, the atmosphere felt calm. Months passed quietly. Sophia's pregnancy progressed steadily, and Adrian ensured that the best medical care remained available at all times. The changes inside the mansion were subtle but noticeable. Adrian spent less time away from the estate. Several of his advisors commented quietly about the shift. The man who had once dedicated every waking hour to expanding his empire was now balancing his responsibilities differently. Sophia noticed the difference as well. Adrian still remained a disciplined leader. His empire still operated with the same efficiency that had made him feared across multiple criminal networks. But there were moments when his attention moved somewhere else entirely. Moments when he stood quietly near the window of Sophia's room, looking toward the future he had never planned to have. The child arrived early one winter morning. Snow covered the garden surrounding the mansion as the private medical team prepared one of the guest suites for the delivery. The hours passed slowly. Adrian remained in the hallway outside the room, waiting with a calm patience that surprised several members of the staff. For a man who controlled an empire through precise decisions and calculated risks, this moment carried a different kind of uncertainty. Finally, the doctor stepped outside the room. His expression carried a quiet smile. Everything went well. Adrian nodded once. And Sophia? She's fine. The doctor stepped aside, allowing Adrian to enter. Sophia rested quietly on the bed, exhaustion visible in her expression but relief in her eyes. Beside her, wrapped carefully in a small blanket, was a child who had changed both of their lives. Adrian approached slowly. For a moment, the powerful leader who had once commanded entire criminal networks stood silently, studying the small life that now depended on him. Sophia watched him carefully. Her name is Isabella, she said softly. Adrian looked at the child again. The reality of the moment settled quietly around him. The empire he had built through years of strategy and control suddenly felt less important than the responsibilities standing in front of him. Sophia understood what he was thinking. The transformation had begun months earlier, but this moment completed it. The man who had once married her as punishment had become the person protecting both her and their daughter from the dangerous world surrounding them. Months later, Sophia stood once again near the window overlooking the gardens of the mansion. Isabella slept quietly in a small cradle nearby. Outside, the estate remained calm. Adrian's empire continued operating beyond the walls of property, but inside the mansion a different life had begun to take shape. Sophia thought back to the moment everything started, the day her father had promised her future to Adrian Varela as repayment for a debt. At the time, it had felt like the destruction of her life. But now she understood something unexpected. That moment had not been the end of her freedom. It had been the beginning of a destiny neither she nor Adrian could have predicted. And as Sophia looked toward the future waiting for their daughter, she realized the truth behind the strange path her life had taken. The cruel Mafia boss who once forced her into marriage had never expected the woman he married to become the person who changed him forever.